Here we are for another round of the 70s versus the 90s, and it's a real possessed round when I put Richard Donner's The Omen against Chuck Russell's Bless the Child. And, this one was an interesting one to get through, so let's just go ahead and dive right on in to the first one. We have Richard Donner's The Omen, which stars Gregory Peck and Lee Remick, they welcome a child into the world, but it's born under a bad sign, so to speak, but then Gregory Peck's character becomes the ambassador to London and stuff, and so then they go there and seem to be living their best life, but then strange stuff starts happening, and it usually surrounds their son, or usually their son Damien is in the middle of it somehow, or at least around when it happens, like at his birthday party, a big lavish affair, and his nanny kills herself and hangs herself off the side of the building and crashes into one of the many haunting gags in this film. And it's one of those things where, it just really just sends chills down your spine. And what's great about The Omen is it's a really like masterful thriller, very much a mystery. We don't, in our hearts, we kind of figure that, Damien is the Antichrist, but, you don't really know for sure. And the whole movie is basically Gregory Peck trying to dispel the prophecy that priest lays on him and stuff. Because granted, it does sound a little strange, but everything that priest tells him ends up happening in the film. And, no matter how hard, like Gregory Peck and David Warner, who's a photographer, he ends up, finding weird stuff in the photographs that he takes. Because then after seeing the nanny kill herself at that birthday party, he becomes obsessed with what's going on. And so then now he's, also on the mark for death list, because and mind you, his kill might be the best one. Because when they take that dude's head off with that fucking plate glass window and it just and spins, that is what great horror should look like. And also, like there's many other ones. The baboon sequence is nuts, and of course the use of the dogs. And what's good about The Omen is it doesn't rely on a lot of bells and whistles and shit. It just kind of is able to create suspense with just a look and noises and music. And the music doesn't really overstate the film either. It kind of stands alone on its own. And of course, that prophecy is fulfilled. The Lee Remick gets pregnant again, and the kid ends up dying, and then she ends up dying, and then once the kid can finally inherit the power position, kills Gregory Peck off. And it's one of those things. It's very brilliantly done. And that, that end scene in the funeral where it's with his parents, and, it just looks to the camera and smiles, of course, leaving it wide open for sequels, which they made a considerable amount of, which none of them really can stand up to the genius of the first one. Of course, Richard Donner, one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, definitely made a lot of entertaining films and, knew what a movie should be. And this is definitely what a movie should be, and the side everybody in it is great. The side characters, like the priest that warns Gregory Peck about all that stuff, like that dude is phenomenal. And just the whole chill, the woman that ends up being the nanny after the first one hangs herself, that woman is chill. The whole film just sends chills down your spine and doesn't even really like have a lot of jump scares. It's just that paranoid thriller that the 70s were so good at doing. And then we move forward to Chuck Russell's Bless the Child, starring Kim Basinger, who ends up inheriting an infant child that her junkie sister leaves on her doorstep one Christmas. And the kid is like born at a time where like some star was shining just like Jesus, and she's got special abilities. She's it's alluded to that she's like the second coming of Jesus and all this stuff. But then there's like this cult leader dude that is now like, he's not only seduced the hearts and minds of America, but he's also seduced Kim Basinger's junkie sister. 6 years later, the kid's now 6 years old, now of age. Like he's gonna try to turn her to the side of the Satanists and stuff. Because like his people have been killing kids, and the film itself is like a kind of a thriller too, but it's one of the look like just pop bubblegum thrillers. It's not really, there's not really any substance. There's not nothing in it that you don't really see coming. There's a lot of special effects in it. We see a lot of demons and angels floating around. It definitely plays up that spiritual angle. It's not really the Antichrist, which was is Damien is in the Omen. This is more like the new Christ or some shit. And so the movie kind of has a little bit of a made for TV movie quality. Chuck Russell was pretty good at doing action flicks, the mainstream blockbuster type stuff. But this one, seems to be phoning it in. Most of the actors phoning it in. Even Jimmy Smits as a cop that was a seminary student. He kind of sees all this stuff coming. And then the end climax is pretty decent, but it doesn't have that just chilling effect that the Omen does. It kind of falls short. We jump into, because of course they kidnap the kid, and then Kim Basinger's fighting to get the kid back, so she doesn't get seduced to Satan's side and all that stuff. And so, there's a lot of heavy-handed metaphors and stuff, and the film kind of relies more on its mythology than actually telling a story. And the ending is kind of everything just wrapped up nicely, and nothing ever really happened. Everything's gonna be okay type stuff. Whereas in the Omen, that kid looks at that screen, there's a lot more stuff that's about to get messed up. So this round clearly has to go to the Omen, a horror classic that not even the sequels could touch, and like any other film that came after it. That's why like some of them are just completely irrelevant and forgotten, because the Omen did it so good. Why even bother seeing some of this stuff, And Bless the Child is one of those kind of, if you haven't seen it, you could probably skip it. If you've seen it, you probably don't even need to watch it again. The Cliff Notes kind of sum it up. You realize how crappy it is. Whereas the Omen, each time you watch that movie, it becomes like you see stuff you hadn't seen before, and you realize just how brilliant that movie is. So for anybody keeping score, that's now 37-31. 70s are up by 6. And they're really kicking ass right now. Of course, getting into spooky season, going to be a lot more horror matchups. And of course, the 70s were the best at horror, in my opinion. And we're going to see for sure, because we're going to be pitting them, of course, especially for the main events. The next one being The Exorcist versus Stigmata. And we'll see many bonus rounds in between that. So prepare to get frightened. And like I said, if I've said anything that you disagree with or anything that's wrong, let me know in the comments. I don't care. I'm open to suggestions, collaborations, whatever. I'm just doing this for the fun of it. Whenever I got some free time, here comes a matchup. I have no life. This is all it is. Become a scientific obsession type thing. So 'tis the season to get the shit scared out of you, and definitely the 70s would scare the shit out of you, and maybe the 90s for just how bad the shit is. But like I said, we got the scientific studies, so we'll see how that goes.